evolving with the cosmos. The cosmos is full beyond measure of elegant truths, of exquisite interrelationships, of the awesome machinery of nature. The surface of the earth is the shore of the cosmic ocean. On this shore, we have learned most of what we know. Recently, we have waded a little way out, maybe ankle deep, and the water seems inviting. Some part of our being knows this is where we came from. We long to return, and we can, because the cosmos is also within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. Carl Sagan.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle that is sponsored Saturdays at this time. And it's something in which all of us meet together as wise beings. We all have inner wisdom, and we have a chance to share that with one another and to be inspired to remember things that we might not remember that we actually knew, but we do. So this is that opportunity. Our speaker for this week is someone who has spoken for us on many occasions. It's Bob Buss, just such a revered member of this group. Just Bob, we want to thank you just in advance for just so steadily sharing so much of your wisdom, cultivated over years of personal experience in the Zen Buddhist tradition, and also as a religious studies professor. So, and all your life experience. So we're very thankful for you sharing with us some thoughts on the idea of the wise leader from religious and philosophical traditions. I thought what I'd ask everybody to do, if you know how to use the little chat feature that we have on this Zoom, is to just mention one or two features to you before we even start listening to Bob of what to you is a wise being or a wise leader. What are some of the marks? Maybe you want to say one or two marks of a wise leader for you. These are good. Great. So far I'm seeing tolerant, one who leads by knowing how to follow, ethical, listening, someone we could all trust, connection to nature, magnanimity, someone who embodies what it teaches, inclusive, balanced life, empathetic, consideration of history, unifying, and someone who understands awareness expressing itself through different forms. Okay, well, that's a great starting point for you, Bob. Let's take it from here.
Well, I like what you said about remembering. In Greek, that word is aletheia, uncovering. What we don't know that we remember, but that we do remember, just as you said. And aletheia is also a word for truth. And so it's an interesting kind of concept. And this theme of leadership is one that I really sort of jumped at, even though I was, just about to go into a 5-day Zen retreat. So I haven't had a whole lot of time to prepare it. But it's one I've been kind of, as Renée says, preparing for most of my life. It's been one that these are 3 people I'm going to refer to that are lifelong intellectual friends. Marcus Aurelius and his teacher Epictetus are the Stoics. And the Stoics are a kind of side philosophy. They're not part of the central tradition of Plato, Aristotle, and continuing right through the main line. they're kind of a shadow group that is right there at the heart of it, but to the side, and continuing all the way through. And the Enlightenment, you may have a figure like Montaigne, who is right there, again, on the side, keeping it going. And so that's kind of interesting to me. And I think the Stoics are our greatest philosophers of ethics and morality. Um, I continually find them relevant to the positions that we face today. And contrasting that with Solomon, again, one of the most intelligent, but also considered to be a wise thinker in the Bible. And the Dalai Lama, of course, in our own times, considered to be extremely wise. And each of them, Solomon and the Dalai Lama, add something fundamental to what the Stoics are talking about, although you can find all of them along the way as well. So I'd like to begin by talking about what we mean by in the West to start with, and then throughout the world, what we consider a wise spiritual leader. And I'm kind of connecting all three of those terms: wisdom, spiritual, and leader, um, as a compassionate guide who leads with humility, integrity, and deep purpose, grounding actions in love and service rather than power. Leadership oftentimes is linked to power, and that's not the case in this tradition that I'm going to be emphasizing. It's grounding actions in love and service rather than power. And again, the Greek tradition is called Stoicism, which centers leadership on virtue, resilience, and emotional discipline. We're guided by, in the Greeks, by four cardinal virtues, and we keep talking about these in GEM: wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, and it's service over ego, calm decision-making over chaos. A term that comes out of the Stoics is memento mori, awareness of mortality. In the Buddhist tradition, we say it's all impermanent, but we're going to die, and things pass more quickly than you can imagine. So, as the Dalai Lama said, maybe we should just try to be happy. And then the trick is, what is happiness? And at the same time, to stay grounded, humble, compassionate, rather than arrogant. And so that's our starting point. I think most of you have heard the Greek expression, philosopher king. Obviously, that's our leader, the philosopher king. And of course, you can have philosophers who are not kings. Nietzsche would be a good example. There are people who are extremely wise, but were never asked to lead. Confucius is a good example of a philosopher who was never asked to lead, and leaders never really paid much attention to him, though he wished they would. And of course, we have very interesting kings who were not exactly philosophers. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, a number of people who I think are extremely intelligent, but they aren't exactly philosophers. And that's kind of interesting. What I mean by a philosopher, the word is interesting. Philos Saphi, lover of wisdom. And I think a lot of people are that, but there is a tradition that involves that as well. Socrates and Marcus Aurelius repeats it: philosophy is a way of life. And Marcus Aurelius wonderfully says, how can man find a sensible way to live? Socrates said, concern yourself less with what you have and more with what you are, so that you can become as excellent as possible. Of course, the Greeks went to the Delphic oracle to say, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen? What's the future? The Delphic oracle above that would say, know thyself. So it's interesting to explore this love of wisdom, and that'll be the topic that the leader is involved with. And I wanted to quote an Old Testament book of the Bible because I found it extremely interesting. It's from the book of Amos, way back in the Old Testament, but it describes our time so poignantly. And in the book of Amos, it says, "There will come a time when I will send a famine to the land, not a famine of bread or a drought of water, but a famine of truth." How does that feel to you? A famine
Yeah.
of truth. I want to stress that the Marcus Aurelius had another way of looking at that. He said, dig inside. Inside ourselves is the fountain of good, and it will forever flow if you forever dig. So those two, I think, complement each other well. All things are linked with one another, Marcus Aurelius said, and this oneness is sacred. There is nothing that is not interconnected with everything else, for things are interdependent and they combine to form this universal order. It sounds like the Dalai Lama, but it's actually Marcus Aurelius. um, and I think this kind of, I'll just end with this part for the Greeks, that's kind of a limit of Greek philosophy. The guiding principle of Greek philosophy is reason. And Marcus Aurelius talks about this. And you can define reason in a lot of different ways. But essentially, as a guiding principle, it is meant to be self-starting and self-directed. Many of you probably know that the Greeks talked about three parts of the soul, the three-partite soul: reason, sensation, observation, and will. And famously, Plato gave the model of the charioteer. The charioteer, the driver of the chariot, is reason. And the two horses pulling the chariot are a black horse and a white horse. The white horse is our sensation. The black horse is our will. And if you keep a good tight rein on those two, you'll be okay. I think that's somewhat of a limiting factor, and that's why I wanted to also mention Solomon and the Dalai Lama. But I'd like to have you just consider this idea of leadership as I read several quotes from Marcus Aurelius. You can live your life in harmony if you can take the right path and think and act in a correct way. For I consider the good to be the dispensation of justice, and in its practice, my desire can find its true home. I love that. My practice and my desire can find its true home. Maintain a feeling of compassion, independence, and justice, and keep your mind free from all other thoughts. Fellowship is the purpose behind our creation. Look deeply. Don't miss the inherent quality and value of everything. I'm reminded of a haiku poem by Basho. Look carefully. The clover blooms along the fence. Ah, it's the that gets you. So on every occasion, ask yourself, is this really necessary? And remove not only unnecessary acts, but the thoughts that precede them. For without excessive thoughts, there would be no superfluous acts. That's also known as simplifying your life, really simplifying it. Everything that happens is as ordinary and obvious as a rose in spring or a peach in summer. And the same is true for disease and death, slander and intrigue, everything else that bothers or delights fools. I love Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, which says, you know, if you can't control very much in life, only what you own, what your own reaction is to things. And if you just let things happen because they have to happen, you'll be okay. It's an interesting definition of karma in a tradition that never even thought about karma. Nothing can happen to you that nature has not prepared you to bear. Love only what happens to you and is destined for you. What can be more suitable than that? A good definition, perhaps, for tranquility. Be like the cliff continually battered by the waves that stands firm and tames the fury of the waters. I'll end with saying Marcus Aurelius is very interesting. He um, didn't ask to be emperor, but when asked to be emperor, he accepted it. He accepted the responsibility. He was a pacifist, but Rome, in the 12 years he was emperor, oftentimes was at war, and he led them as conscientious as they could. He followed the rules of war. He tried to negotiate an end as soon as he could, and he did the best he could and kept going on. And as soon as they said, well, okay, you've done enough, we want somebody else, he said, oh, thank you very much, and retreated and was happy as a clam to just read philosophy and not be emperor of Rome. He never sought it, and he accepted it as his sort of lot in life. I'd like to contrast this with the wisdom of Solomon. And those of you that know Solomon, he was the third king of Israel, the son of David, the writer of the Psalms. And basically, he said that leadership is governing with a discerning heart. And I found it very interesting as a starting point for Solomon that in a dream at Gibeon, Solomon asked God for an understanding heart. In this dream, God came to him and said, I will give you anything you want. What do you want? And he said, I want an understanding heart. I want wisdom to be able to govern your people rather than long life or wealth. Uh, he knew he was smart, but that's not the same as wisdom. And he prayed to God for wisdom. Of course, Solomon is renowned for his good judgment. He famously determined the true mother of a baby by proposing to cut it in half, knowing that the real mother would refuse to let the child be harmed. Um, he was known as a builder and a great writer. He wrote the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, and these together are called the wisdom literature. I mean, the Bible is full of wisdom, but the wisdom literature, the writings that actually exemplify religiously significant wisdom, comes from him. And he also built the first temple. It was said that God said David could not build the temple because he had blood on his hands. And that's not because he fought. God told him to fight. He had that problem with Bathsheba, and he lusted after someone, and she was married. He sent her husband, Uriah, to the front lines, where, of course, he was killed. That's the blood on his hands. And Solomon then had to build the temple because David was not allowed to. Um, it's interesting that Solomon, with all that wisdom, still had a frail character. And just to give you a sense of what that frailty was, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Most of them came from outside of Israel. In other words, were foreigners. And so he had trouble with adultery, I'm sure, but he also had, and with sexual promiscuity, but also he had trouble with idolatry because those wives would bring their gods, and he oftentimes built temples to gods other than the true God. Um, so that's part of Solomon's legacy as well. He was consistent, he was righteous and obedient, and he had limitations. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon reflects on a life under the sun, finding that pleasures, wealth, and human wisdom are ultimately vanity or empty. Meaningless vapor is what the word vanity means. The book advocates for fearing God and enjoying life's simple gifts as the ultimate purpose. And this, again, I think resembles Marcus Aurelius, but it's a little different. And similarly with the Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama's take on leadership hits a truth we can often overlook. People don't grow under pressure alone. They grow when they feel safe and valued. Community and mindfulness is the thing that the Dalai Lama adds. A leader creates a safe environment, calm, grounded leadership that lowers the emotional temperature and supports clearer thinking for everyone. And so the thrust, and this is in the reading that Renée sent out, selflessness, the lack of ego, builds trust. Compassion has structure, clarity. It's not soft, it's very firm, but it is still compassion rather than strength. Inner values matter more than external rewards. Leaders show up in different forms, but they're all rooted in care and sincerity. Leadership at its core, according to the Dalai Lama, is relational. Please remember how you make people feel. People remember how you make them feel. And that's where real impact begins. And this is probably what everyone says about the Dalai Lama. When they've met him, they come away saying, you know, he wanted to talk to me, and he was only talking to me. People would try to get him away and get him on schedule, and they said, no, I'm still busy talking to this person in front of me. And that person may be a custodian, the person giving him a glass of water. Didn't matter who it was. They felt something special with the Dalai Lama. And sometimes you feel it just by him walking by, and he kind of glances at you, and there's something there. The Dalai Lama said, "We are naturally driven by self-interest. It's necessary to survive, but we need wise self-interest that is generous and cooperative, taking others' interests into account." The Dalai Lama said, "I believe in justice and truth, without which there would be no basis for hope. But the whole of humanity is our human family. This planet is our only home. Trust begins with compassion. Agency is the antidote to stuckness or stagnation. Agency, our actions, words, and thoughts. Leadership is advocating happiness, giving a voice to the voiceless, thinking about others. And so that's the thing I think the Dalai Lama adds to the mix. So that's a framework, and I hope several things stimulated you to think of leadership, and as perhaps the words that you gave at the beginning come back again, and perhaps other words come forward. But does anyone have any questions or comments or reaction to any of that? It's a lot.
I'm really grateful that you brought leaders from not just the political tradition, but from the religious and philosophical traditions. And that seems really compelling from the standpoint of moral leadership, that we really, really would expect from those traditions. I want to read a quote from Queen Liuokalani that for some reason didn't make it into our almanac. She says, "The voices of the people are the voice of God." So she was the last reigning queen of Hawaii. And that was her view, that the voices of the people are the voice of God.
She is such a subtle thinker, because in a way she's contexting this as saying, well, you've taken away my kingdom, and you've done so in a way that isn't quite honest. You haven't followed your own rules. But even as a Christian nation, which you say you are, how can you do this? How can you take away my sovereignty? And if you listen to your Christian hearts, you will respond differently. And she was putting that out as a challenge, saying, if you truly believe, and she's really saying not just politics, because politics is power. It's power relationships, and what you can do, you will do. I mean, we see this with our leaders today, especially authoritarian leaders. I can do this, therefore it's right that I do it. We'll end it when I say we'll end it. The wisdom tradition is much different. It does involve other people. It does involve God. That's the reason for Solomon. You know, Solomon had his frailties, but he truly believed in the mystical tradition. That was a whole path of finding wisdom. And so Liliuokalani is really representing the tradition of Solomon and the Dalai Lama, I think, that other side of wisdom, not just the political side, the social side.
Yeah. There's such a humility in it, isn't it, to say that the voices are the people are the voice of God. It's not my voice that is the voice of God, me as the leader. It's the voices of my people. And I just wondered what people had to think about that idea of the wise leader. Yeah, Diana.
Um, First, I get very sad because that's not the leadership we have in our country, and it is very stark change from what I see happening in our world, all over the world. And so what I do is I bring it back to myself, and I say, what can I do as a leader? And how do I want to be in this world? And some things you said was grounding action in love and service rather than power, and deep listening and understanding ourselves so that we can hear other people, but not from a place of ego, but from a place of compassion and love. And you brought up wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. So it's like, how do we embody these these forms of ideas as a leader? And we think, well, gee, I'm not leading the country. Well, we are leading. We're leading other people. We're leading our family. We're leading our job. So it's like really turning it inward and exemplifying these qualities in ourselves that are the highest form of leadership. And you brought up listening, deep listening to God, and saying, okay, what do I do next? You know, instead of my ego. And so I think this is a really important subject, because more and more people, in my opinion, need to start doing their own leadership and finding out what they need to do to bring more love and compassion to ourselves and to the world. So thank you, Bob. That was really comprehensive. Thank you.
I think it's extremely interesting to look at Marcus Aurelius in the way that you're talking about, because he says, you know, really complaining about what's happening to you, complaining about the world as it um, is really self-defeating, because what's happening is happening. And there's nothing you can do about that. You know, you have to accept what's happening. He didn't want to be emperor. That was the last thing he wanted to be, because he knew he'd be sending people into war, which he hated. You know, at the same time, he realized he would probably be a better commander in chief than anyone who would otherwise lead, because he would not be doing it for glory. He would be doing it for Rome. And Rome was an ambitious global power, and it did have conquest in mind. Um, but there were still limits that as emperor he could control. And he could certainly negotiate with whatever other leaders were out there as much as possible. And so within that context, and this is listening in a very subtle way, it's listening to what you can control and what you can't control. And that's the heart of Stoicism. You can do a lot, but you have to do it within the framework of your own kind of ideas and response to things. And that will allow you to lead. That will allow you to do something. You can continually do something, and yet if you fight against the pricks, the thorns of the rose, you'll be in trouble. Because as Samuel Beckett said, in the context, why do you, Saul, in the Bible, Saul is the former, is going to become Paul, but he at this time was against God, and so he was persecuting Jesus. And on the way to Damascus, God sends a bolt of lightning, knocks him off his horse, blinds him, and he says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul is speechless. He doesn't know what he's going to say or do. Why do you kick against the pricks? And later, Samuel Beckett in the 20th century said, well, there's a whole lot more pricks than kicks. That is our world. That's the world we live in. But you can control your response to them, what's happening. And the things that happen, this is karma again, don't happen by accident. They happen because of your past karma. And that's the world we live in. We have to take responsibility for that too. The Dalai Lama was very clear. One person once asked him, do you regret anything you've done, any decision you've made as a leader? And he said, yes. There's one I think about every day. And a follower had come to him, a monk, and said, can I practice this? Tibetan Buddhism has very secret, esoteric teachings. And there was one that this monk really wanted to do. And the Dalai Lama said, well, you're really too old. You needed to start with this when you were much younger. And so I'll give you some other practices, but this one is not for you. And later, the monk heard that, or at least said, well, I guess I should be younger. So he killed himself to be reincarnated as a younger monk. And the Dalai Lama said, I regret that. I didn't know that that's the way his mind works, but his mind was working right there in front of me. I can't control how another thinks, but I can observe how they think. I can read them if I'm careful enough. Part of my job as the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people is to know who comes in front of me. And he generally did. Women were raped and persecuted by the Chinese when they took over Tibet. And the Dalai Lama came with them and said, okay, that happened to you. Now, what practice can we do together to make you whole again? That's hard. And the people were listening to him. In most cases, he got it right. One time he got it wrong, and he thought about it every day of his life, he said. That's what Renée is meaning, I think, by humility, being humble, being known that you could make a mistake. And I think
Yeah.
Longman had that.
Let's see. I see that it's either Deshane or Jade that's wanting to speak, and I think Mary might invisibly have her hand up too. Not sure. We'll see. Deshane.
Mahalo Bob for sharing wonderful structure for being a wise leader, or how to become wise, spiritual, and a leader. From the quote which Renée mentioned, that voices of people is voices of God, right? And that kind of reminded me of the enactment of Ramayana scene where the Still and Moving Center created this wonderful play, which was a space for community, for all the people to come together and enact this wonderful play. And we didn't have a voice to our own self. It was Auntie Doris who was putting voice to our characters. And that single voice was representing all of us in the play who were playing such beautifully. And one of the things Auntie Doris had mentioned in that moment was, I will do my work, but at the same time, my energy is going to be influenced by all of you. If you are going to get excited, you find your joy, you find your presence, your aha moments, that will bring that modulation in the voice for that play itself. And if I try to look from a spiritual perspective, it's that space not only allowed one, it put a voice that was common for everyone so that it could be heard as one single voice. Second, it allowed everyone in the play to embody their own role in a way that brings out the best out of their own self. Like, for example, a lot of teachers got to represent their movement tradition. A lot of the people who were not from movement tradition got to experience that, and they found something unique to themselves. People who came to observe the enactment, I'm sure it was a big pleasure and joy to them. And it all kind of boiled down about embodiment over information. Over that 4 to 5 weeks of preparation, there's a lot of information poured in from all different ways. For some people, didn't even have any background of what Ramayana is, what characters is, and in those little moments, everybody found their own spark of way to reach to the character they were playing. And it's a very unique path for everyone. And as a leader, I mean, everyone who were involved in the play pitched in to assist everyone to reach to that spot where they could find their embodiment. And after the whole play was done, if you ask who was the leader, no one was the leader. Everyone were one, expressing their highest self. And people received different things what they were seeking out of that enactment. And I feel that playground is what we call it as a sacred ground or a sacred space, which is fostering all this wonderful, diversity of energy, which is not explainable. It just happens. As long as you keep it sacred, mindful, allow space for everyone, and allow also to self-observe yourself before the action. Because I remember, every practice before we started, we brought ourselves to the present moment, whether it is in form of doing a chant or sacred prayer. For me, it is take a pause. Do you observe yourself before you step into this role, this action you're going to do? So I think it's a wonderful example of being a wise leader, where no one is a wise leader. Everyone is playing their own role beautifully well.
Well, the Ramayana is the greatest spiritual story that ever came into being. And so we can respect that. Those stories are about our own spiritual development. And at any point, as you say, as you're playing a particular role, especially if you're doing that, or if you're reading it and trying to understand the role of whoever it is you're reading about, it's significant to be able to read their motivation. Why are they doing and reacting and being as they are? And that may be, we generate interest in the good, but there are bad and evil characters as well. And if that's the role we're playing, then we have to figure out, okay, what's the motivation of the demon king that steals Rama's bride from the beginning? I mean, why does he do that? And again, we have that. You could ask Solomon, well, 700 wives. Why that? Why so many? What's wrong with you? And he does have to realize, well, where is my motivation? What is making me tell my story in that way? And I think what's interesting about all three of the traditions that I mentioned is that all of them reject the past and the future as where we live. We only make decisions in the present moment. That may sound Buddhist, but it's as Christian as it comes. That's what Jesus is talking about. You know, wherever two or three are gathered together, at that moment, there I am. It's not about the future. The kingdom of God is not something that you want to happen down the road. It happens when you die. The kingdom of God is within you right now. And that's, I think, what Solomon is talking about. How do you relate to God right now? And if you miss it, what can you do about it? How can you, gear up and change direction a little bit? And what's interesting about the Ramayana is that people do make mistakes. They misjudge their power over people who are trying to help them or hurt them. Sita, the wife, is very misunderstood by Rama in a couple places, almost painfully. Like she is completely loyal to him, and yet he says, "Well, why did you go off there?" Hey, it wasn't exactly my choice, you dummy. But there's something more subtle going on. What is this relationship? Marriage is something that's extremely important in the Bible, in the Stoics, and the Dalai Lama as well. Family. Those things are all connection. Those things are important. So tell your story and keep telling it over and over again every time you get a chance.
I do have a question regarding wise leadership for you, Dishin. Having played the part of Rama, who was the crown prince to begin with, and who eventually did attain to the throne. What, from your experience of dropping into that role, did you feel as if you learned about wise leadership?
I think seeking truth, that was one of my biggest learning from playing the role. And the underlying values there are underlying values for even seeking truth. It is stemming from compassion. It is stemming from doing the right thing, from humility. I think those are the two main learnings that I got from that.
I'm sure.
I thought I saw David not exactly raising his hand, but he was moving his lips as though he wanted to speak.
I was just typing it into the chat right now. I'm just curious if you have, or anyone has thoughts on what's in play on the planet currently that's lending itself to this rise in authoritarian and power structured leadership as opposed to wise leadership.
Yeah, let's maybe throw that out there in general.
I'd like to comment on that just real quickly, if I could.
Please.
It seems that not following a leader would have their own voice, and just following an authoritarian leader is abdicating that self-accountability and that inner wisdom. And it is the antithesis of that self-conceptualization of knowledge and carrying knowledge. So, I mean, following a leader seems to be, or even Aurelius stepping up and saying, okay, I'll do what's necessary. I will be the emperor and I will follow through, even though I don't agree. But the moral tangent on that is, what if you don't agree, and how can you step back? And how you're not going to just be a blind follower to other people. So I think there's a little of that going on, and people are trying to learn that it's safe to be step back and be discerning and to hold a moral high ground and not be fearful. I think that's what's being brought up, and everybody's going to get a different lesson in that, an opportunity. That's what I come to.
Yeah, I think it's a very subtle question that you're asking, David, because the question is, why is that happening? And that, of course, Marcus Aurelius was said, beats me. I'm not God. I mean, I'm not in charge of everything. I don't know why this is all happening. But the subtle side is really, as was just said, how are we responding to the world? Are we taking responsibility, or are we allowing others to speak for us? Are we part of the, for example, MAGA movement? Are we MAGA thinkers because we're allowing that to happen? We're allowing someone else to think for us. And that's the great sin that all three of these would say. You've got to think for yourself. And if you allow others to define what truth is, if you allow anyone to define what it is, then you've got to be extremely careful. You create the conditions for things to happen in a way that you may not want, that you may really say, why is all this happening? This is this authoritarian feel around the country. Um, well, um, if you're not part of the problem, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. You are part of that human family, and you're connected to everything. So you're somehow involved with the vote that happens. The other side of it is that happened, outside of your control. Somebody was elected in an election you may not have agreed with, but then now in the present time, how do you react to it? How do you respond to it? What is your proper role? And that creates a whole different way of looking at it, I think. Um, and it's a little tricky. Um, and part of it is, and I love what the Dalai Lama says here. I mean, when the Dalai Lama, if you asked him, well, why did China take over Tibet? I mean, what what did Tibet do that deserved that karmically and all of that? And the Dalai Lama reframes it. He says, look, the Chinese are not evil. The Chinese are people just like you and me. Their government may do things that seem harsh and cruel and are harsh and cruel. But then we still have to relate to them as human beings. And we have to have compassion for them as well. And so he he says, look, I would love for Tibet to be a place of refuge, uh, a society, a state that was 100% non-political. They would be a refuge for ahimsa or nonviolence, without any politics whatsoever, and aligned with no one, no power struggles at all going on. That's what I think Tibet should be. And, we all know that he is more responding to the conditions than he is controlling that politics. Um, who knows who the next Dalai Lama would be? Yeah, David.
Yeah, so something you said early on in that response reminded me somehow of this idea of either turn the other cheek or love your enemies. Since we're part of this system, how it is that we're responding is a part of that system. And so how do we respond in a way that changes the system? And I think if the system is based on fear, if love is the opposite of fear, I'm not sure where to go with that.
Well, Deshan talked about ultimately what he learned from the character of Ramayana was to seek truth. And so if truth is our starting point, then how do we relate to the truth? And the Dalai Lama has this wonderful, it's almost like a poem. It says, never give up. No matter what is going on, never give up. Develop your heart, your compassion, your feelings. Too much energy in our country is spent developing the mind instead of the heart. Be compassionate, not just to your friends, but to everyone. Be compassionate. Work for peace in your heart and in the world, but especially in your heart. Work for peace, and I say again, never give up. No matter what is happening, no matter what is going on around you, never give up. In popular culture, we say, never give up, never surrender. Um, so that's the immediate answer, I think, from this wise tradition is don't give up, don't surrender. It's so easy to give up. I mean, I say that because that's how I am struggling with the same conditions that we're facing. I lose hope. I feel helpless. And that's what this tradition says. Okay, buck up, Bucky. Uh, it's time to really start looking at what you have control over, which is yourself. Being a depressed person that wants to not get involved with politics because it's too ugly, it's too messy. Well, that's giving up a little. You have to be extremely careful to not give up and do what you can. Do your best and let the rest go. And I love what Buddhism says about this in karma. Uh, do your best and don't worry about the results. Cast your vote and don't worry about the results. Uh, Play your role, whatever that role is, find it, and don't worry about the results. For the environment, plant a tree and don't worry about the results. Um, I like the indigenous people would say playing your role in the environment means doing something and relating to the environment as though it was your family. Braiding sweetgrass is a wonderful example of an indigenous person saying, it's not us growing sweetgrass. The sweetgrass is part of what we are creating together as a place. Sweetgrass depends on us as much as we depend on sweetgrass. We are all connected. And that kind of thing, if we have a piece of that way of thinking and we act according to it, then we don't worry about the results. We don't worry about all the snakes in the Everglades. We don't worry about the end of species. We try our best. We do what we can. We certainly don't go out and shoot lions, but none of us ever would. But what about our politics that is, taken the Endangered Species Act and gutted it, gutted the Environmental Protection Agency? What can we do? And then don't worry about the results. You can't control the results, but you can control what you do. And it's not to give up. It's not to lose hope. It's not to be helpless. That's the greatest challenge. I mean, for me, speaking personally, I give up much more than I have any business doing. And Solomon had way too many wives, and he should have kind of worked out himself a little bit in that direction. And yeah, I can look to something as wonderful and wise as Solomon and say, yeah, we all got some room to grow here.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up some great points amongst all of you in regard to this idea. If we're going to consider this concept of the wise leader, let's look within and to what extent am I my own wise leader in the way that I am leading my life. And so we had Diana talking about that from the very beginning. What am I doing? And then when we look at what Duchesne was saying, for example, in regard to the learning from having played the role of Prince Ram, he was looking for truth. And part of the truth that he was looking for is, what is my duty at this moment in time? Oh, I am a loyal son. My father, the king, has asked me to be exiled to the forest. Okay, I got my marching orders. That's my duty. I will do that. And even when invited to come back to the kingdom after his father's death of a broken heart, at having sent his son away because he was tricked into doing that through a weakness of his own, as Bob would probably notice with his youngest queen. Anyway, once Rama did that, and he was asked to come back to the kingdom by his brother who was watching the throne for him, he said, no, I've already promised my father. That's my duty. I need to stay here in the forest. And so always, seeking one's own duty. And it's going to be different in regard to this question of David's, of, why is there a rise of authoritarian leadership? And Mary is basically pointing to the passivity of the peoples of all of our different countries in which these authoritarian leaders are arising. Right? So that's something that takes place amongst a huge number of people, and a certain kind of general will or lack of will even amongst those people. So looking at that from a larger perspective, and then within that, what is my role? For example, you could think of that story of Helen Keller, and her Jewish family was at great risk living in Nazi Germany. And there was a woman who was her father's secretary who was not Jewish. And she wasn't out there protesting against the Nazis, but what she was doing is taking Anne Frank's family and another family and hiding them carefully away from the Nazis to protect them up in their attic, and then somehow providing food for two whole families in times of, no doubt, very scarce supplies of anything. So she found her role in the face of an authoritarian regime that I think sometimes we wait until a certain point. We're ready to play a part, and we're waiting until we see what that part is. And all of a sudden, okay, she didn't go out and protest against the Nazis, but all of a sudden she acknowledged a duty that she had to protect, in this case, her boss and his family and another family. And what heroism that she had in acknowledging that was really her duty at that point in time. And what a great, real act of protest to an authoritarian regime, to keep safe these precious, precious people from the violence that would be done to them. And, some of them did survive as a result of what she did, including Anne Frank's father, for example, who was then able to save her diaries so that we could read about their persistence. And I think Anne Frank, for example, how was she a great leader? She kept this cheerful optimism throughout her entire, it was almost 2 years, I think, stay in that, here she is, a young teenage girl in this dark attic, crammed in, not much to eat, probably, rotten potato soup kind of meals, just really dire conditions. And yet she kept this optimism. And, what leadership she showed as a 14-year-old or 15-year-old for the rest of the world in terms of what we can do in the face of authoritarianism. I'm just noticing I just allowed myself to go over our time. I want Apologize for that. I'm going to mention to you what we're going to do next week, and I'd love to have someone in the meantime choose a few words to say on behalf of all of us, and thanks to Bob. Next week we have the week of self-emancipation, freeing ourselves. That's interesting, I think, in regard to this idea of a wise leader. Do you have the discipline to be a free spirit, is the quote for the week from Gabriel Roth. And we have a young man who's spoken to us once or twice before. His name is Ryan Quirk. He's a college student in Santa Barbara, California, who is also an author of a rather philosophical book. And he's going to speak to us probably from the Zen tradition with a little bit of yoga blended into it. So that will be a treat for us to look forward to. And the following week, we have evolving the human body in this year of evolving with the cosmos. And we have someone who is a geneticist professionally. I think that will also be very interesting. So is there someone who would like to give on behalf of all of us a vote of thanks to Bob? David.
Yes. Bob, I always so look forward to your talks. You bring not just your life experience and your wisdom, but you also bring this element of joy. There's always a little bit of a chuckle and a bit of maybe a giggle that's always present. And it's such a pleasure to have wisdom served up in such a delicious format. So really, thank you so much.
Yes, well said, well said. Thank you so much, Bob. We know you didn't have as much time to prepare as you did, and oh my gosh, I can't imagine how it would have been better. It was wonderfully done. Thank you.
Oh, I had so much anyway. I could have maybe trimmed it down a little bit with more time. But it's amazing how much is there and how the context really gives you resources you didn't know you had. You know, that truth that Deschamps talks about, or the courage that you talk about with Anne Frank and her family, it comes from someplace. And that's, I think, where the wise leader gets a chance to find that source. As Marcus Aurelius said, deep down there's goodness. How do you delve into that source of goodness that's out there in the world? Solomon said, my soul is connected to my master, to God. How does that help me live in my life? You know, that's infinite source of spiritual creativity and power that has nothing to do with me, but I'm connected to it because I have a soul. I have a pit of goodness that I can delve into. The Dalai Lama is interconnectedness. You know, we have resources that should give us cause to move forward more joyfully.
Yes, yes. And those are the sources of our inner wisdom. So thank you all for sharing that is inner wisdom, whether in silence or in speech, the way that you think or the way that you carry this forward into the rest of your week and days. And Mike, it was wonderful to have you here for the first time. We really enjoyed your presence. Thank you so much. Aloha all.
Yes, and thank you all. Loved your wonderful insights.
Mhm.
Hello, have a great week.